Well, let's give a hand to our host. Thank you for having all of us. Well, thank you. So what I wanted to do is actually just talk a little bit about how it is that Andreessen Horowitz got excited about marketplace companies, and then we thought we would do a kind of point-counterpoint thing where Aziz could talk about his company Nash, and then Olivia, who's worked on all the marketplace opportunities over the last couple of years at the firm, can talk a little bit about how we evaluated, what we dug into, what were the references like. No, not that part. And just share all of that and go from there. But so a16z has had a long-running background in marketplace companies, and the reason why we've been so excited about marketplace companies is just because it's one of the few things in consumer-facing products where there's just a really obvious defensibility as you get bigger, right? This is, as all of you know, it's so hard to build consumer products where someone can't just fast follow you. And by the way, we're playing this out right now in all these AI-enabled companies, many of which are kind of like, really cool UX, like kind of API wrappers on top of other foundational, AI technology. But the question is, what is the defensibility? And so we got so excited, I think, over the years about the fact that if you have if you have buyers and you have sellers, that all the buyers want to show up because all the sellers are there, and all the sellers want to show up because the buyers are there, and you have those network effects, and those are great. And so it literally has gotten to the point, I think, in the first 10 years of the firm, this is before Olivia or myself, where the consumer strategy, the consumer investment strategy at a16z was a marketplace strategy. That was the core focus of the business. And so since then we've obviously done a lot more. But one of the big things is I'm so excited to have Olivia here on the panel as well, because she and I over the last couple of years have looked at hundreds of opportunities, and then as I have now moved over to kind of next gen gaming and other things. I'm running the a16z Games Fund. Olivia is the new head and leader of marketplaces at a16z, and so she's going to have a lot of fans, a lot of friends all of a sudden, and so it's great to just have her on the panel, and so anyway, thank you everyone for joining. All right, so let's talk Nash. Aziz, tell us about Nash, and
Absolutely.
maybe a little bit about you too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off just to introduce everyone to Nash. Our mission in Nash is to make it easy for any business to offer reliable local delivery. And we do this by building all the software components that businesses need to offer this to their end consumer. This starts from eligibility, pricing, route optimization, live tracking, operations, customer notifications. It's a complex stack that a business needs to actually compete and offer reliable delivery. We build all these software components, and all of this sits on top of a marketplace with more than 500 delivery providers that actually go and execute these jobs. And then we basically sell this software to platforms, so point of sale systems that want to offer delivery as a first-class experience. We sell this to marketplaces, so marketplaces that create transactions that they choose to want to facilitate delivery for them would use Nash, and we sell that directly to merchants as well that have the ability to integrate that into their tech stacks. So that's what we do at Nash. And
I was going to ask, by the way, I mean, there was a period where every company that wanted to do delivery would just go try to hire their own drivers instead of integrating with an API like yours. And why did that stop? Why did people stop doing that?
Maybe in the founding story, so I started Nash with Mahmoud, my co-founder, and I've known him since high school. We did science fairs in LA here together, actually. And then we were classmates at MIT. Prior to Nash, Mahmoud had a gig work company, and he was running a gig work company. And myself, prior to Nash, I started a marketplace for bilinguals to volunteer as translators for humanitarian organizations. And we kind of grew that marketplace to be the largest organized translator community. And today, every large NGO uses that to get access to translation. And then when COVID hit, Mahmoud and I kind of came together, and there was this surge in demand for delivery, but there was a giant gap in the market where on the demand side, they lacked the ability to scale reliable supply. So if you hire your own drivers, all of a sudden recruiting was a giant challenge. You could not figure out how to scale it. And if you work with a marketplace or a singular third-party provider, then you are entirely limited to their ability to offer that service to you. And then on the supply side, what we saw during that period is different supply networks were working at completely different utilizations. So the supply network that was doing pizza would peak at dinner time, but the supply network that did pharmacies and florists and retail would peak in the morning. And these different utilization peaks were just gone unutilized. So when we saw a surge in demand in the market in COVID, the gaps became very, very clear. And our biggest thesis around starting Nash then, and Mahmoud's experience running that gig work community, and me starting a marketplace before, is our thesis is a marketplace can actually optimize these inefficiencies. So the big thesis was, how do we use a marketplace dynamic to optimize this across the entire market, where a merchant now can run at the optimal level, but at the same time, the providers end up with a more optimal network utilization.
Yeah. Well, and I remember, at Uber, we made a similar observation, which is, when you drive people around, that happens often, after work and, on 2 a.m.s, mysteriously people want to go home, that kind of thing. But at the same time, there were time units like lunchtime, where Uber Eats could be layered on potentially the same supply. And the thought was always, well, if you utilize supply better, you pay the supply better, then of course, if we're competing against our pink mustached rivals across town, that we might be able to ultimately be able to pay them better and win them over. And then Aziz, could you talk a little bit about what is the first kind of I don't know what the right unit is, right? But how did you get your first batch of drivers? What is the first batch of apps, that stimulate the demand side? Tell us kind of the early kind of year one cold start problem kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Mahmoud and I started working on this problem, I think one of the first things we used to do is be very vocal about what we're working on, and anyone who cared to listen to what we're trying to do, we'd talk to about, and that actually created a really nice kind of effect of us getting closer to more experts in the space that potentially even had a lot of experience in verticals that we were interested in. So we had a lot of really amazing kind of conversations earlier on, and part of in that early phase was talking to a lot of customers. So we did outreach. We talked to a bunch of customers who were having these problems. It's kind of a hair on fire problem. People would get on the phone immediately from the first kind of email. That was a really large positive signal for us. And in that first batch of customers, I distinctly remember one of them was actually COVID kits delivery. So around that time, it was COVID. And there's this thing where they're saying people are stuck at home because they think they have COVID, so they can't come pick it up. And it'll take 3 days if I ship it, but how do I get it to their house and then have someone pick it up and back to me? And this is one of the earliest use cases where we onboarded this demand. For some part of it, maybe some of us had to get in their cars and fulfill their own, but maybe. But you have demand and you go immediately to supply and say, hey, I have work for you. And that pitch went really well, where you say, can you go and fulfill this work for me? Now remember, the technology, the platform, the enablement, this is all very, very weak, right? None of it, maybe a lot of it non-existent too. But this is really that starting point where get initial demand, go find supply to fulfill it, get this transaction multiple times, And this is when we start to figure out how to fit this into a platform play. And part of creating these really nice early conversations, I think that's, we had a really awesome conversations with Kevin Novak, who was very early at Uber. He led their data science team. Kevin in turn introduced us to Andrew as well as an expert in the space, and this definitely was a big part of our kind of early start conversation. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, maybe now we'll turn it over to Olivia. Talk a little bit about how when a new marketplace kind of startup opportunity hits your inbox, and maybe to the extent you remember the Nash thing, obviously very, very memorable. And since we did double down. Talk a little bit about how you typically evaluate. What do you look at? How do you think about it? And then you use any examples as needed.
I actually reread our Nash seed memo this morning in preparation for this panel, and thankfully we got to the right conclusion twice in a row with you guys. But it was back, I think it was fall 2021 was your YC class maybe, and when we made the original investment. Had a lot of the core things that I think we got us excited about Nash that have since proven correct. So for the seed for us for marketplaces, I would say there's 2 or 3 kind of core questions we're trying to answer. So one would be macro level, do we think this is an exciting market where a marketplace can be built? And in this case, everything that you both mentioned around the need for on-demand and scheduled deliveries is larger than ever, and it's growing. We were okay, check that box. We talked to a lot of our own portfolio companies that were either marketplaces or services businesses in food, in pharmacy, in storage, and they were all telling us, this problem is not solved for me yet. When Nash is up and running in more cities, we would love to use them. So that kind of checked the box for us on the market side.
Well, and I remember a couple folks were using the DoorDash
Yes.
API. And of course, some of them also kind of feel like maybe they're going to compete with DoorDash.
Yes.
And so they would rather not use the API
Yes.
if they could. So I remember that was an interesting kind of strategic.
Yes.
discussion
Or they didn't
as
want
well.
the car that smelled like French fries to be delivering
Yes, also
important
true.
Rite Aid pharmacy. And then the second component, I think, for us, for marketplaces at the seed is definitely team. You both had amazing, you and Mahmood had amazing marketplace experience, and you had worked together. We don't often find co-founders that go all the way back to high school science fairs, which was an incredible opportunity with Nash. Because for early stage companies, I think whether the founders are a good fit and whether they end up sticking together is one of the actually largest risk factors that we've come across. And then the last component at the seed, and it's a little different at the Series A, which we can talk about, but at the seed, it's just is something starting to work here? You guys were, I think maybe had a few dozen customers. I won't reveal the exact numbers, but you were doubling every month. And this was maybe 5-6 months into the company. And I would say that's not infrequent for us of seed marketplaces that we invest in, where the momentum is just so strong in the early days that they're growing, 50, 75, even 100% month over month for those first 6 or 9 months or so.
Yeah, actually, in fact, I know you keep yourself a whole series of benchmarks and things. I think some of this has been published, some of it hasn't. But yeah, do you want to just at a high level talk about what you typically benchmark against?
Absolutely, yeah. So we keep every marketplace we see, we just record all the data across a ton of things like transaction value, GMV, number of customers, GMV retention, all of these metrics. And again, we can talk more about this, but one of the questions for marketplaces is always can you make the leap from that first vertical or from that first geography into the next one? And you guys have, I think, blown that away. You have massive enterprise customers now, and you still are working with many SMBs, and that continues to grow, and they're very happy customers. But you guys absolutely knock that concern out of the park, which is great.
Awesome. And Aziz, maybe we'll go back to you on this, which is kind of around your company financing strategy and everything, right? Yeah. So, these days, I would say, we tend to we'll invest in 1 or 2 YC companies a batch, something like that, but it's not our usual focus. However, I know for you guys went through it, seemed to have a great experience. Talk about, would you recommend that for people? What's your take on, going through an accelerator versus trying to raise money yourselves, and just talk about that kind of early decision.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm a 2 times YC founder, so maybe a little bit biased here.
You're a super fan.
But yeah, clearly I think I'm a super fan. I think if we go a little bit back into the psychology of a founder as I think about it when I start a company, I think one of the initial fundamental things that I want to do is build my own conviction. And as a founder, you absolutely should know that fundraising and hiring and doing really nice campaigns and collaborations, they should always be a means to an end. And that end should be building a healthy business. And one of the hardest questions you have to ask yourselves when you have an idea is, do I want to work on this for 15 years? Because that's what it takes to build a really good, strong company. And it's not an easy exercise. And I think one of the best things I learned, I think, from my previous experiences starting companies is to be very honest with myself. And I don't think it was an easy journey for me to separate the excitement and the data points that get you excited and potentially convince others to hear your story and follow it, to actually convincing yourself. And I think one of the really good things that I recommend YC for in general is they have a good energy of pushing some sort of hard questions very, very early on. So many successful companies will not go through YC, and that's totally fine. One of the things I like about them is when I reflect on how I brought this psychology, I felt that I got a lot of this from the first time I did YC. So when I got the opportunity to decide if I want to do it again, part of it is, look, building a company is extremely difficult. There's 100,000 things that can go wrong. And if YC can de-risk one element, which is potentially upfronting a lot of the hard questions for me and putting up front is gonna de-risk some of it, then it was a clear yes for me. And this is generally how I frame it to people. But I think it's worked really, really well for me in the past.
And Gary's back running it also as well. We're big fans of Gary Tan and the whole team there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
What do you do? I mean, so you're going through YC, and and then at some point, some investor stuff starts to happen. Talk about kind of like the sequencing of that.
I think there's one decision Mahmoud and I made, which is even prior to YC, we've decided that we're not going to raise any money before we have revenue, and that was an explicit decision we made.
Why?
Because we believed that for both of us to have enough conviction in this business, we are going to need to see customers' value created. And if it does not map to dollars, then we will never know if that value creation is real. So this is just a decision we made up front, and it worked for us because at that point in our careers, we were able to basically afford that decision. And I think that's just one starting point. And in the way we ended up doing it is by the time we had started YC, we had our first couple of customers onboarded. Throughout the YC kind of time, we were focused a lot on scaling that customer. Throughout that time, our conviction is growing, really, really fast. And the way we approached that fundraising is to basically say, okay, we are going now to a point where we want a little bit of capital to validate this thesis from a couple of customers that see value to a business. And there's a transition, and that was the thesis for the capital. And we did the model and calculated it and figured out the number that we want. And this was the core of us. At that point, we did run a process, talk to a bunch of investors, and our maybe the one helpful thing is like, how did the outcome happen? I think for us, if you go back to us talking to everyone earlier, we ended up really learning who are the experts in the space. And I think when we met Andrew and Olivia, one thing that fundamentally stood out is the deep understanding. Making this happen we knew we did not make all the right decisions up front. There's a bunch of things we made wrong, and we're going to need to iterate on some elements. So when you find people who fundamentally understand that space and actually have the resources to support you, it ends up being extremely more valuable than the capital itself. And that was, for us, a really, really fundamental decision.
And you know, I think especially the founders in the audience might actually enjoy hearing a little bit about the tactics. Is, you know, like how, you know, when you decide to run a process, like what does that look like, you know, in terms of architect? Like how many firms do you put in? How do you decide to, like, you know, pick, like, to what extent does the offer matter versus the people? Like, just talk about, give some opinions there.
Yeah, I would say you have to start with your business thesis and business needs. So you cannot run a process if you do not know how much money do you need and what for. A process is not a fundraise maximizing exercise. It's not a thing to do to raise as much money as possible. A process is something you run to achieve your goal. So you have to set your goal up front. And I think the biggest lesson I've gotten that I think worked really well is to hold yourself accountable for the goals that you want to achieve. And if you ever would deviate from these goals, go back to that point. It takes a lot of discipline to be honest with yourself. So it's very easy for someone to go, yeah, of course, you know, it's better to triple the amount I'm raising, or let me take this money because it's a better brand name, or 100 reasons that you have. Can you map this to you being honest with yourself about building a successful business? And what that looks like is when you're disciplined, it's really important to project that discipline to everyone else in the process. So being fair was something that was really important for us. So we set a goal, we set a deadline to make a decision. Everyone we talked to knew that deadline. And that deadline, we had to say no to a lot of investors. We still have really amazing relationships with them today. They have no investment in our company. Why? Because we were fair in the process, we were transparent, we were not playing tactics upfront. We had a goal, we told them what our goal was. We had a deadline, told them what our deadline was. And these transparency elements, I think they're so obvious, they're just so hard to actually stick to during the process, because you'll see something and you're like, should I just kill the process? But then you know, there is, I think sticking to it is the hardest part about running the process, and it pays dividends in the long term.
And you know, obviously pitching 50 investors is too many, pitching 2 is too few. Like what did you guys decide, and what was the group that got to qualify into the kind of the first set that you were pitching?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point where it's tough to honestly isolate our own capabilities than maybe some of the ecosystem. A lot of the investor interest, most of it was either inbound or from that network that we've created earlier. So we've biased towards the network to begin with. That was a very clear kind of filtering criteria. And then from the inbound, I think we actually had, if I remember, 90 to 100 like meeting requests. Obviously, we couldn't do all of it.
That's a lot of meeting requests.
Yeah, so we kind of, I think we just really focused on who is working in our space, yes, who has relevant experience, who has a good reputation.
Well, and maybe one last thing before I switch back to Olivia is you know, what do you think? Give us the critique on the investor community. Like, do you think people understand marketplace companies? Is it too weird? Is it just because it's not a social app? You know, what's your take on this sophistication?
I think one of the most powerful things about marketplaces is kind of what I call incentive engineering. I learned this from Terjum Lee, the volunteer marketplace I made, which is, you know, one way to evaluate a marketplace is the transaction. And you say, oh, great, like liquidity, transactions, is there movement? And what I think is fundamentally, as a thesis, more important and will lead to liquidity and transactions is the incentive alignment of your marketplace. I think it's very easy to set up a place where you say, well, you know, demand wants to have access, and kind of supply wants to sell more, and the best proxy for this is liquidity. I think one fundamental aspect of our people's incentives align. And I'll give you an example. In our first company, we have the marketplace has volunteers on one side and has humanitarian NGOs on the other side. And for one of the hardest things we thought about up front is how do you incentivize this marketplace to have liquidity? And we thought about gamifying it. We couldn't pay people because you don't have the money. Who pays them? And one of the biggest learnings that volunteers get this instant gratification when they help someone. And that was the core thing that built this marketplace. And when we understood that, hey, volunteers get instant gratification from doing free work, if it's scoped and filtered for them and you ensure you're not wasting their time, all of a sudden you build the largest volunteer community for translators, it's the largest translator community, period, in the world, service more than 100 languages. Every NGO in the world would use it because now there is supply that's available. The NGOs care about reliability and availability, the more kind of basic things. But now when you evaluate this marketplace, you can say, okay, great, there's liquidity, there's transactions, but it would have been impossible if the fundamental incentives were not there. And I think, for Nash, these incentives were the merchant side needed reliability. I think they care about 10 things. The most fundamental one is reliability. When I tell a customer, your goods are on the way, they need to arrive and they need to be reliable. The supply side needed predictability. They needed a lot of other things. They needed price, but predictability was the big thing. If you crack it, if you figure it out. And I think this is not necessarily something that in your conversation with an investor, it's very easy to sell, but it's so fundamental to you as a marketplace to understand the incentive engineering.
Right. Well, and just to build on this point, I mean, I think, this is in my opinion, one of the fastest ways that you can figure out, as all of you are evaluating investors while you're talking with them, is do they think of every problem from a multi-sided perspective, right? Because it's easy to say, you know what, I wish I could hit a button and then and the car is going to show up and the driver shouldn't have to talk to me. I should have a do not talk to me button, and I should have a and all these things where you're kind of like, okay, yeah, you're thinking about one side of the market at the expense of the other side, and you don't even understand what the hard side of the market actually is meant to be. And so I think this incentive engineering thing I think is exactly about the balance between each of these pieces. And so to transition a little bit, Olivia, I know in the background when you are thinking about marketplace companies, I mean, they're all so different, right? We've done stuff in pets, we've done stuff in food, we've done stuff, where people are selling things over video streams. There's real estate. There's so many different things. What is your strategy to kind of just cover these different spaces or lanes, and talk about some of the themes you're excited about these days as you kind of map these out? Just talk about that whole thing.
Yeah, it is interesting because there's so many types of marketplaces. Like even these days, I'll look at some, B2B construction materials marketplace where people are selling asphalt to, someone else in a construction site in New Jersey, which you think would be like vastly different from like, a teenage girl selling her Vans or whatever brand is cool now on like Depop or something like that. But I think what we have found is like a lot of the kind of metrics that represent whether or not something is working on a marketplace actually are fairly consistent across these like types of verticals and industries. And that's the kind of thing that we look at. From the highest level perspective, I think what we love to see is people building businesses on a marketplace, whether it's actual existing businesses that are kind of turbocharging their sales, or, one example would be Airbnb has created this whole new class of hospitality businesses that are now multi-property. Turo has people who've bought 10, 20, 30 cars that they now run fleets through something like that. Depop, as an example, there's now teenagers who go to Goodwill every weekend and rifle through all the bins, and they sell, thousands of dollars worth of inventory every month. And so I think that once you have people building businesses on your marketplace, they are kind of driving your growth for you, like the flywheel is really going. And so there's lots of metrics that we look at to see how well that's working. So it's, growth in supply, growth in demand, how quickly are kind of, is supply taken up? What's the fulfillment rate on the marketplace? What does turnover look like? Some of these metrics we've developed are things a little more complicated, like GMV retention, which Nash has always been incredible at, which is not only like how often is someone coming back to transact again, but ideally they're coming back to transact more than they did the first month. Like maybe they spend $50 month one and $100 month two. So often, we're investing in seed marketplaces where they're maybe doing 30 to 50, 60, 100K in monthly GMV, which is a feat. Like, it's hard to get there, but it's a whole nother level to get to 500K, $1 million in monthly GMV. And so at the seed, it's those things I mentioned around the market, the team, are there like early signs that something's working? At the Series A, it's more like, okay, do we have line of sight that this can be at least a few $100 million company and get to the Series B, from the Series A in the next couple years. Ideally, for us, especially as a multi-stage fund, if we're making a Series A, we want to bet that it's going to be a $1 billion company or bigger. One maybe example from our own portfolio would be Whatnot, which is like a live shopping marketplace. And at the seed, they were just doing Funko Pops, which is this very specific type of collectibles. And you can make the bet, I think, at a seed round that, a Funko Pops company could get to an interesting Series A. But by the time they're at the A, they had proven, okay, this works for Fig Pins, which is another collectible. This works for Pokemon cards. This works for sports cards. So you want to start seeing between the seed and the A that it's going to jump in, that either that starting market is big enough to be $1, $5, $10 billion business, or that they're going to make the jump because they've enabled such a compelling behavior for buyers and sellers into whatever that like next industry is going to be. And for you guys, it was like expanding from the local businesses into regional businesses, giant, multinational enterprises, and then also continuing to grow the supply pool too.
Yeah, and I think that this is also one of the biggest head fakes in the marketplace industry that I think investors who are untrained can easily kind of be deceived. I mean, there's actually a really funny email exchange between Fred Wilson from Union Square and Paul Graham of Y Combinator. And they publish this all publicly, so it's in good fun. But literally, the original pitch, I mean, people just really thought that Airbnb, aka Air Bed and Breakfast, was literally was a bet that travelers wanted to sleep on airbeds, right? And so, I mean, it's really hard to like go from there into, oh wow, this is gonna compete with Expedia and Hilton and kind of the whole variety of it. And yet at the same time, it's obviously so advantageous to start with vertical. Aziz, talk a little bit about working with your investors over time. What have you thought of as kind of and I think we have our answer to this, but why don't you share? The kinds of things that you end up wanting the most help on, kind of in some of the early years, versus some of the things where where you guys are really heads down on it.
The starting point for this is, were you successful at bringing subject matter experts on your side? And it really changes everything for us because, for us, you guys led our investment, and we had a couple other investors join as well. And there's a very clear difference between the experts in the space that are able to actually contribute into, let's brainstorm this together, let's really strategically think about the business a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out. And I think for me, this is an exercise that is amazing to do in the case you have an investor that is an expert as well. Because they're incentivized, you ideally have built a really good relationship with them. They have the context of your business. They're updated. It's not just a single advice in the void. So it's really nice, kind of all comes together where there's an expert that understands your business context, that really wants you to succeed because hopefully they like you, but they're also incentivized to see you succeed. And I think this is the first dimension where working with investors who understand your space, and I think we've been really lucky to work with Olivia and Andrew here, We work with Kevin as well in that kind of space because they really understand the space, the marketplace dynamic, the logistics space. What is the dynamic of this market likely to look like in 5 years? And there's an exploration task. There's a kind of an exercise to really think down to the fundamentals and build it up. And I think this is the strategic one. And then there's a lot of the tactical stuff where best go-to-market motions. I think it's really incredible that an investor probably has seen so many more experiments run than a single founder. And I think there's always this you got to run your own battles and learn and get your own kind of battle scars. But you should absolutely just try to get the download of, hey, what has worked? What didn't work in the past? If I'm about to start to do something in my go-to-market and my recruiting, all these tactical elements, that's another dimension where we've collaborated very heavily on. And I think especially with Andreessen, I think we're lucky enough that it's not just the power of these two amazing people on stage, but there's a whole kind of firm behind it that really backs you. And I think that really shows, the benefit is clear to us. We, I think, take advantage of it too much, but I'll continue to do so.
Amazing. Well, and I always joke that the reason why venture capitalists spend so much time on Twitter is because it's like all the smartest people in the world come and tell us all their smartest ideas, and all we have to do is the last mile of translating that into 140 characters and sharing that with the world as original insight, and that's why we write such entertaining tweets. So it's crowdsourcing wisdom. Olivia, talk a little bit about kind of people are sometimes shocked to know that a16z is over 500 people. I think it's 530 something like that. Yeah, it's quite. What does everyone do?
It's a good question. Yeah.
They're on customer calls with us all the time. That's what they do.
No, we have an amazing team that I feel very grateful to work with. We have probably somewhere between maybe 80 and 100 investors across all of our teams. So there's Andrew's Games Fund, we have a crypto fund, we have the kind of core venture fund, which is where I work on the consumer team. And then honestly, most of the rest of our team, the other few hundred people, are our operating partners that are kind of in the weeds supporting our companies. It is as specific as helping you make your first sales hire. We have people who can help you do a technical interview with an engineer and kind of gauge are they going to be good to join a startup that's 10 people. We have people that are on the go-to-market side who their job is to kind of form relationships with kind of the gatekeepers or hopefully the door openers at some of these big platforms and companies and help you sign deals, all the way to as specific as okay, you got a scary email from the New York Times, there's going to be an article about you. What
That's
do you do?
Never happened
No,
before.
never. Not to any of our companies. And so, I think part of what Andrew and I do, as well as, kind of working directly with companies, is just helping our portfolio companies triage who within a16z can basically help you almost skip the line or save you weeks or months of work that you would have had to do yourself. And then best case, our founders get to know our operating partners and can go just chat with them anytime they want. Which hopefully is, I know they find it very fun.
I literally can attest to that. We have people from Andreessen physically show up at our customer offices and say, hey, I got to talk to you about Nash.
Did they have invites, or was this just?
I don't think they were invited.
Amazing. So I wanna hit the fast forward button and talk about future stuff. And of course the big. I think at SF Tech Week, I think I spoke at 5 different events about AI. I think you attended and spoke at quite a few also. So there were many. It's obviously the topic du jour. So we need to have the topic du jour add on to the panel. Talk about, Olivia. I know you've been thinking a lot about this recently, which is, marketplace companies are so much about using software to connect often humans with other humans. Yeah. And obviously, now you throw in this whole generative AI thing where maybe, are humans going to get replaced? Is it going to be what kinds of work? what is going to happen to this marketplace sector because of AI, and what's your thesis there?
I think it's a spectrum, and it's funny because many of the marketplace businesses that were previously hardest to scale, like anything that touches real assets and is moving items from point A to point B, are now the safest almost from everything that's happening in AI, because you can't, ChatGPT can't like drive something from, one yet. We'll see. I do think we're seeing many of the in real life marketplace businesses are able to use AI to make their logistics or operations a little easier. So we have a food delivery business, and now they can use ChatGPT to write more interesting or creative kind of descriptions for some of the items that are coming on board every week. Or, they can use it to make the backgrounds of their images a lot more compelling to the consumers. And then maybe the far other end of the spectrum is like these marketplaces that are either digital assets or digital services. I would say Canva is like one example, which a lot of people don't think of Canva. It's a design platform as a marketplace, but they have historically had a whole cohort of human designers that are making these special templates and assets that then customers can come on and kind of buy and use to make their flyers. And Canva now has this interesting, almost existential question of like, we have data on all these designs, and like we could just generate them for free by ourselves using AI. Like, do people care that it was human generated? Like, are people just going to want the cheapest AI only option? My take, I think many marketplaces are going to fall somewhere in the middle, where maybe AI makes search on their platform easier. Like, I would love to be able to talk to DoorDash and just tell it how I'm feeling that day and what I want to eat, and have it, bring up an option versus like 200 choices every time. Or like on the supply side, lots of travel agent marketplaces. Imagine if all those agents can make the itineraries 10 times faster using generative AI on kind of the modules. So I don't think that AI is going to replace marketplaces at all, but hopefully will make the experience better for both sides.
And I mean, the travel one's kind of an interesting, that's an interesting case, right? Because you could argue both ways, right? You could argue that this technology is going to augment the travel agents and it's going to make them that much more productive. You might also argue that it's going to replace the agents entirely. And so do you have a sense for like what is the more exciting opportunity?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there are differences of like, where you play in the market. So just to take travel as an example, there's a lot of luxury travel marketplaces that are geared towards people booking 20, 30, 40K trips for maybe themselves or their family. And in that case, I think AI has a role to play in helping to generate recommendations and scrape data. But kind of the custom touch, the customer service, the having someone to call at any hour of the day when something goes wrong or when they need a different, option for something ends up being really important. Whereas the other end of the travel marketplace is like maybe you're just only willing to pay $5 and you're looking for a somewhat custom recommendation for like 2 days in Paris or something. Maybe in that case AI ends up replacing the agents a little bit faster than it does in other cases. We're already seeing some marketplaces offer almost a hybrid option where like the legacy product still exists, but if you want to go for like the light version that they clearly mark as kind of AI generated, it's a lower price option as well. But I think we'll see a lot of evolution there in the next like year or so. It's pretty early to call.
Well, it's so amazing because I mean, obviously the whole industry has gotten excited, and it's been like 6 months or something, and so everyone's already like, oh my God, we need to regulate this, or it's going to destroy everything, or it's going to be amazing, and like literally it's 6 months. It's like, calm down, like we need to actually like launch some companies first, on this. Well, a couple final questions, and then I think we're going to take some questions from the audience. Aziz, where your company is now, maybe you could just share a little bit, like kind of the how many employees, a little bit on the size and scale, and then what is it that is keeping you busy as you kind of look into the future, and like what's the you're I think ahead of quite a number of the folks here in terms of stage, and so that'll help folks kind of understand kind of what they have to look forward to.
Yeah, happy to share. Today we're about 45 people in terms of a Team size, I think one of the biggest investments we've made, if I think of like the stages of Nash, one is the validate the thesis. The second one is how do you scale your business and go to market. And I think we're at a stage today where we've made a lot of investment in our product being modular. Our mission is to make it easy for any business, underline any, to offer reliable deliveries, underline like reliable. So our first kind of 2 years was how do we make this reliable, and the software complexity there was extremely large, and we've made really strong investments that we're at a place that I'm super excited about all the stuff that we've built. And for the piece about any business, we've made very conscious decisions about creating these modular pieces of the software because different businesses have fundamental different needs on how they want to fit logistics into their business. If your product is going to succeed, you should fit to their workflow and not ask them to change how they do business. And today we're at a stage where, beginning of this year, we started this experiment of expanding really stress testing this thesis of any business. So we went from pure focus in the food industry to pharmacy, flowers, and retail beginning of this year. And next quarter, we're making a big push into the e-commerce side. And first half of the year, we successfully launched 7 countries. So we went from the US only to Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Spain and France. So this was our first half of the year, and what's next for us in our kind of that year horizon is to really like stress test that into building that scalable platform where we collect the data now. Did we make these right decisions on the product, and are we able to actually take what we built to take it to these new verticals and new geography, and does this software component piece truly scale? And this is probably what I'm most excited about for our future at Nash. And I think we saw some really awesome results first half of the year, and this is our biggest investment kind of moving forward.
Amazing. Yeah, so more geographies, more verticals, more functionality kind of on top. No, it's wonderful to be in the scale, kind of mode, for all this. And of course, hiring all the right people ends up being, one of the key moves there. And Olivia, for you, talk about kind of if you had a request for startup, kind of like what are you looking for? Any particular opportunities and spaces in the market?
Yes, we try not to be too maybe prescriptive in our own thinking about like what is the exact marketplace that needs to be built, because like the data will tell us, like the consumer base will tell us, like if the flywheel starts going on a marketplace, it's really, really hard to stop it. Like, to use the Airbnb example again, like if you were kind of very rigid in your thinking around like airbeds is never going to be like a big business, you would have missed kind of this massive investment opportunity. So we do try to be open-minded with marketplaces in particular around like, look, even if we aren't the user yet, maybe we will be someday, or maybe there's this other big community or market. That being said, there are a couple big markets that we haven't seen maybe a massive, multi-billion-dollar marketplace emerge yet, where like, okay, maybe it's AI, maybe it's, something else, market timing that could emerge. So like, blue collar labor, like how people find jobs that aren't necessarily the typical office job, like that's still unsolved in many ways. Home rentals in many ways is still unsolved. Home services in many ways is still unsolved. So any of those big kind of greenfield markets, many of them actually still have room for a massive company. Some of the ideas have been taken already, but there's a lot still to build.
Well, and I was going to say, by the way, I think sometimes you also end up with categories that have dominant products, but then they end up being a little bit like calcified.
Yes, exactly.
And I was actually just at a dinner with Sean Rad, who's one of the founders of Tinder, and Tinder, it's kind of a marketplace. It is, okay, it is. No one can tell me differently. And so, I was asking, Sean, because it's so amazing that they came up with the swiping functionality like pretty much right off the bat as they were building it. Actually, this guy John Badeen, who is iOS engineer on Tinder, built it, And I'm like, is this all there is going to be? Is this, are our great grandkids going to be swiping away? There's got to be more, So anyway, so it's all up to the Apple HMD to make dating different.
Yeah, no, but exactly. Like I feel like when I first started as an investor, it was like the unbundling of Craigslist was the big marketplace graph. And then maybe 5 years later, it was like the unbundling of eBay. And then, there's just more and more opportunity, every few years that go by to build these like amazing marketplaces that take this thing that was working and kind of adapt it and update it to like the next generation of consumers, which is exciting.
Amazing. All right, well, let's give our mini panel a hand. I believe, Mike, do we have some?
Yeah, we actually have we're going to try to get in 2 quick questions we can right here. So,
Great.
Hey, how's it going there, guys? Quick question here. So, name's Levi, and one of the things I do within everything marketplaces is lead fundraising. And so the question I'd love to ask you guys is, what are the biggest mistakes that you see either seed or Series A founders do, or startups, when it comes to fundraising? That way, we're able to take some advice here and, be better for it. So.
Okay, I'll start. And then Andrew taught me most of what I know, so you can chime in after. I talked about this as a pet peeve in my Everything Marketplaces video session already, and this is hyper specific, but I think you'll agree. When people make their graphs cumulative instead of monthly, for some reason, there's just little things like that I think investors see and get kind of nervous about and think like, oh, maybe there's, something underlying about the business that the growth is slowing. And in reality, nobody just ever said like, don't make your deck that way, like make it a different way. I would say like maybe a higher, more helpful level would be like, think of the fundraise as kind of almost a narrative, like telling the story of your company. And a big part of that story is you. And so often, even when companies are coming in for the final pitch at a16z, like you probably went through this, we will say like, take 5 to 10 minutes of the 45 minutes and just talk about yourself and your background and like why you want to spend the next 10, 15, 20 years of your life working on this company. I think sometimes founders feel like they need to skip that or breeze past it, but it ends up being like really, really important. Other than that, I would say hopefully we try to publish some helpful resources on ways to kind of format your data, how to run a process. I've heard a rumor, I'm curious what you think. Some people are now saying leave your favorite investors or your like dream investors to the end of the process so that you can practice. Is that true, or how did you guys do it?
I actually think like I definitely heard that.
Okay.
I don't think
That might be true.
I don't think it's you can practice other ways. Is my kind of response to that, But I do think I think the personal story is actually really strong because I'm in a community where I'm also surrounded by a lot of people that kind of fundraise, and I think I notice personally there's a big difference between those who answered the fundamental questions for themselves and were very honest with themselves. They tend to tell a very different personal story than those who the ultimate objective is to fundraise, or I want to build a company because it's just the thing to do. And I don't think anyone can help you with this personally but yourself. Like this, if you cannot be honest with yourself, it will leak somehow when you tell your own story. And I think the way I frame it is, if you like have that honesty session with yourself and then conclude that you don't want to do this is an amazing win. You just saved 5 years of your career. Like, and I think that's it's a thing that just so many people skip because we have so much content and culture around starting companies and entrepreneurship. There is actually a bunch of people that are just in the wave and never just paused and answered those questions for themselves. And just take a second, do that, and then continue, and then you'll find that in every step you're just fundamentally more confident, more comfortable. These investor meetings aren't a make or break for your business because it's just, maybe this one won't work, next one will work. maybe it's the next round. It's just not the end because you have that conviction, and no one can take that away from you, right? Like no one can.
I mean, it's a good point, and this is like a cliche advice to give, but there's, Airbnb is one example. There's many companies where like at the seed we don't invest, but like we do end up investing in a bunch of rounds later on
At a much more expensive
at
price.
a much more expensive price, unfortunately for us. But like, yeah, it's hard to say like don't take anything personally, but investors make mistakes like all the time, and I think we genuinely like love and appreciate when we couldn't get there at the seed or the Series A, and the founder is willing to like keep us updated or talk to us again or kind of spend more time with us. It's always a pro for us when we feel like we've kind of seen more of the story and have more of an appreciation.
Just so you guys have some empathy here. One of the bits of advice that our mentor Mark Andreessen gives us on this is, when you meet a company and you say no and you make the wrong decision, then you just have to be content that you're going to be tortured every time you read about them for the rest of your career. Yeah. And so, anyway, okay, maybe we could do rapid fire a couple questions.
We have one more. So.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Jeremy Gurwitz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Solace. And so we recently raised our seed round. And I'm curious if you guys had any advice in terms of you've raised some money and you're ready to go, and the trade-off between seizing the market and taking over versus just burning all your hard-earned capital and being left in potentially a challenging spot.
It's a good question, and congratulations on the seed round. That's really exciting. I think a lot of companies are thinking right now about cash management, especially as like the Series A and Series B markets are maybe a little slower than they were in 2021 or early 2022. I think our advice tends to be case by case depending on the company. I would say there are some categories where it's like it's a winner take all category and there's already someone else in there moving fast, going at the same thing as you. And so I think in those cases, like it makes sense to kind of, ideally somewhat not extremely in a negative margin kind of way, but kind of keep up the growth like as fast as you can, and then just making sure you're keeping your investors updated and they are kind of on board and will like help you raise and get to that next round. And then there are definitely other cases where it's like, okay, let's target 3 or 4x this year and not like 7x this year, and like we still think there's not another extremely fast moving player in this space, and we'll be able to kind of raise the next round based on that growth level. Any thoughts from you on how you guys are thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is kind of raised capital is insurance against making the wrong mistake. So if you come and build an operational plan, I mean, obviously I think what Olivia said, what market are you in and what's your company and what you're doing is fundamental. But then if you take all of this and then build an operational plan, and this plan A says if I do these following things, I will spend all my money, but then I will win at the outcome. And in this plan where you spend everything, you're basically telling yourself, I have no room to make any operational mistake, right? And then you can create another plan where you spend half of your money. So you're saying, well, it seems like I can make a couple of mistakes here. So if I come out and I've made some mistakes, I have room for adjustment. I think for me, this framework really helps me think about spending, because what you find over time is you just build more conviction and confidence about your plans, because you're saying, okay, instead of doing all of this, what do I need to do to build conviction that this is the right plan? And you'll probably find a way to spend 1% of that money, just get some validation maybe on the first 5 steps. And then that framework seems to me to be the most kind of sound system where I could be comfortable understanding how to make this trade-off.
Let's all give him a round of applause if we can, really quick. So this is a really awesome chat. So we appreciate you guys, joining us here. I also do want to give a huge shout out to the Nautical Commerce team for sponsoring the event tonight, and being huge supporters of the community. So big thanks to them. So we're in this awesome venue here, have some drinks, food, and really able to enjoy it. And then also have copies of the Cold Start problem for everyone. So let's all give them a round of applause if we can.